I thought a lot about where are we in regards to the outsider and the status quo? Where are we in this modern day struggle for the levers of the American government? And I'm not trying to overstate this because I believe that's where we are. And it really dawned on me listening to something on ESPN television about the NCAA FBI basketball scandal that is going on today. And for those that don't keep up with college athletics, and I don't keep up with college basketball anywhere near as much as I do with college football, but there's a scandal going on. We've always known it was the case, but we're finding out now via some FBI reporting and wiretapping and investigating that shoe companies, the Nikes, the Adidas, the Under Armours of the world, basically funnel money to high school basketball players to convince them to come to their respective university. Clemson would be a Nike school. Louisville got in trouble. They'd be an Adidas school. University of South Carolina is an Under Armour school. The universities can't pay that student athlete, but the shoe companies can figure out a way to end around the process and get money to the parents of the kids or the kid in a very indirect and manipulative way that convinces that kid to go to Louisville or Kentucky or Duke or North Carolina or Kansas or South Carolina or Clemson, for that matter. But, Reb, that's not the story here. The story here is, and I think it goes back to what Richard and I were debating a second ago, what do they do? You said Dennis Miller said this, far more articulate than I. What does the establishment have in store for punishment to us outsiders for causing this brouhaha, this brush fire that we've got today with Trump as the spokesperson for this populist movement? What does the establishment have in store for us once they get back in charge? What is their punishment for people like us? I believe the genie's out of the bottle. I don't believe we're putting the genie back in the bottle.
I hope you're right.
I believe we're in the middle of a sea change in American politics, and I believe that because of this. And I go back to college basketball. The college basketball coach, the college football coach, the university, the conference, the NCAA, the governing body of these sanctioned sports, everybody was doing what? Everybody was getting wealthy. The coaches' salaries went from $300,000 to $4 million, to $5 million, to $6 million, $7 million. The university's athletic budgets went from $1 million to $10 million to $15 million, and now over $100 million athletic budgets. The conference's budgets exploded. The commissioners of the conference are making over $1 million a year. The presidents of the schools are making over $1 million a year. The athletic directors making over $1 million a year. Assistant coaches on both staffs at South Carolina and Clemson in football are making over $1 million a year. Assistant coaches. And the kid looked around. The student athlete looked around and said, whoa, I was okay with this model when the coach was making $300,000, the assistant was making $50,000, the AD was making $150,000, and the university's budget was about $10 or $12 million. I don't know that I'm so cool with this anymore. I mean, I'm the reason they're selling tickets. I'm the reason we're on television. And I'm the only one who is not experiencing any of the windfall and the financial gain and benefit of this. The status quo had taken advantage of the student athlete. Well, they're getting an education. Okay, proportionally, let's take that education and let's apply one value to it. And let's take all the money all these other entities have made and let's look at the proportionality of it. It's a little bit similar to the amount of wealth that has been created in the top 1% of American society and the collective. So think of this. When the powerless realize how the powerful have abused power, we begin to have a tectonic shift. And that is the beginning of the end of the status quo.
Say that again.
The powerless, when the powerless, in this case, the student athlete,
right?
In the economy's case, the 90% wage earner, when they realize through their own volition that however we got here, something isn't right, something isn't working. When the powerless realize how much the powerful have abused power, there will begin a tectonic shift. That's where we are in American politics. Now, the status quo will tell you it's the ugliness and the nastiness of populism. It's an incoherent governing philosophy. It's a fit and a rage, and we'll persevere. I disagree with that. The ruling class have abused the levers of government in a way unimaginable. I was thinking about it this morning. How many of our lives depend on the government borrowing money it can never pay back? Think about your life today. How many of our lives depend on the government borrowing money it can never, ever pay back? If the answer is many, many, many Americans, then the status quo has failed. The smart people, the woke people, the politically literate people, the people that we've always looked to, Reb, because they've got the nice suits and they've got the nice offices. We trusted those people to manage and transact the affairs of the country. Those people have failed this country miserably. And out of that comes discontent. Out of that breathes just a high level of energy and discontent, and populism raises its head. Now, once again, the status quo, the intellects, the bureaucrats, all of these organized forces, they begin to blame populism. Why? Because they can't accept the fact that the status quo has failed. Why can't they accept the fact that the status quo has failed? Because their livelihoods depend on it. Their very livelihoods depend on the status quo's existence. And I made a lot of notes over the weekend. Think about what we normally consider emergency measures. They're now permanent policies. I mean, things that 20 or 25 years ago, you and I would have said, wow, are we really going to take the Fed balance sheet from $800 billion to $2.2 trillion in 1 year? That would have been an incredibly extreme measure. But it's routine now. It's the way we run our government. Because of this, we begin to lose social cohesion. There comes a high level of civil unrest. We don't feel like we have shared purpose in our culture and our society anymore. Because in our hearts, Rev, I believe we still prefer the comforting realization of a central state. We like to know that somebody's in control and everything will be okay, until we realize that the people that have been in control didn't know what they were doing. And I believe that's where we are in the American political dynamic today. And if you think about it, you can say, well, Ken, how can they get away with that? I mean, that's ridiculous. That's on the fringe, man. I mean, I get accused here recently of being on the fringe, same as I was accused of being on the fringe when I ran for lieutenant governor, same as I was accused of being on the fringe when I said Trump was going to be the American president. So my being on the fringe is proven fairly lucrative for me. If you are somebody in the top 5% wage earners, it is in your best interest for the status quo to remain in charge. But once again, Rev, when the powerless begin to understand that the powerful has put their own self-interest ahead of the interest of the majority, you can get away with it for a long time. And they have gotten away with it for a long time. And they're telling us nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Don't worry about over here. No. The people that we've trusted to run the country have done a lousy job in running the country. Now, when you start thinking about those who benefit from these current arrangements, I mean, you know who they are. I know who they are. They will resist any form that threaten their share of the pie. I read something yesterday that blew my doors off. I thought it would be a high number. Roughly 1/3 of all the millionaires created in the last 25 years in the American economy have done so by a relationship with our federal government. Let me say that again. Roughly 33% of all millionaires that have been created in the last 25 years have created that wealth with some sort of partnership with our federal government. And here's how you do it. You take the unserious public, and what do you do for them? You give them entitlements. You give them benefits. You get them handouts. You basically run the government like it's a corporate. And you take, you give the church a little bit. You give tax-exempt status, so the church will be okay with the government. You take the poor people and you give entitlements and welfare and benefits, and they'll be okay with government. And you give the wealthy the government contracts, the lucrative government contracts, and they'll be okay with this corporatism that exists in our federal government. And what happens is so few benefit proportionally at the expense of the many. So when someone tells you that populism is the problem in American politics, look at them and say, no, I think populism is the result of a failed status quo. The status quo has failed the American people. If you have a business that does business with the federal government, you can't be opposed to deficit reduction. They can't pay you if they don't borrow the money. If you're a CEO of a company, if you're a president of a university, if you're head of a charity that receives some sort of government funding, guess what? You can't be opposed to government reductions. You can't be opposed to balancing the budget. You can't be for balancing the budget. Think about the system of higher education. We've talked a lot about it on this show here. Where's all that money gone? There's been a transfer of wealth at the tune of $1.5 trillion from the families of the average American kid to the coffers of higher education. How do you do that? Well, you let the government backstop the loans. Then the kid becomes dependent upon, we give the poor the handouts, we give the wealthy all of their business, and to create this system that so many people are dependent upon the status quo, and any crack or crevice in the status quo leads to a lot of dissent. And when we talk about putting the genie back in the bottle, that's the war that's raging today. It's college athletics, it's business, it's politics, it is Donald Trump versus the FBI. There is an effort as we speak, as organized and orchestrated as has ever been in the history of this country, to push back on behalf of the status quo, ruling class, political class, elitism, whatever word you want to insert there. And it is so many facets and fronts in our lives right now. And I was thinking about it over the weekend. This is not about Trump and the FBI. This is about a person they perceived to be a threat to the status quo. And you're seeing exactly what the status quo. Steve Bannon said it better than I. If you believe this crowd was going to roll over and give you your country back, you were sadly mistaken. And it's all about the money. It's all about the wealthiest 2 or 3% in this country and their ability to manipulate government to the point that that's how they made all their money. Think about it, Riff. Think about what would your world look like today if the government couldn't borrow money that we know it can't pay back.
I know.
And we still believe these people have the capacity to run government? No, they don't. And there's a sense amongst regular people in America, and I know a lot of others find this offensive. I've got some friends of mine who don't believe the common man has any reason to be involved in the debating of American politics because he's not smart enough. I've got some real good friends of mine who believe that. Let the common man have a say-so, and the common man will basically get what he deserves. And I believe that is the great debate we're having today.